Alright, y'all. So today I want to talk about a film that is very dear to my heart, and I'm sure a lot of people who have watched this movie as well. That is, of course, we're talking about Ghostbusters from 1984, directed by Ivan Reitman. Of course, starring the iconic cast, featuring, of course, the main cast: Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Hale Ramis, Ernie Hudson, Sigourney Weaver, and so on. And I don't know what I could say about this movie that hasn't already been said. This movie is a classic. It redefined comedies. It also kind of pioneered the new subgenre of the special effects comedy, so to speak, and just plenty of other things. So I recently got the chance to revisit this movie. I've seen Ghostbusters plenty of times. Like, honestly, the original 1984 film I've seen, I don't know how many countless times. I think it was like one of the earliest movies I think I ever saw, and I loved it as a kid. I think as a kid, I thought it was funny. As a kid, I loved the ghost and the proton guns and the traps, and the whole kind of world of it was really fascinating to me. And it's just always one of those films that feels like a lightning in the bottle, because I feel like, especially when you get into future Ghostbuster movies, I don't think the magic was captured quite as well as the original movie. This movie is kind of a lightning in a bottle. Um, but that being said, I revisited it and I definitely have some new perspective on it, and a lot of things that I frankly didn't even notice. Rewatching this film again for the first time in frankly years. So let's get into this movie. I'm going to give you some of the a little bit of my pros and course cons, because not every movie is perfect at the end of the day. And maybe to give you a little bit of history. Like I said, Ghostbusters was a huge deal. It was very much a film that I grew up watching. I loved the franchise. I even had some of the old real Ghostbuster toys back in the day, and I just grew up with this movie, and I think it's a really great movie. Interestingly enough, this movie could have been really different. It would have been a film called Ghost Smashers, which it was a much more wilder concept. It involved going into multiple dimensions and all this crazy stuff. And the whole thing with this movie was that it had to be completely scaled down. And then no one really wanted to take a risk on this movie, because this movie was actually a pretty substantially expensive movie for a comedy. I think it was like 25 to 30 million was the budget for this, which for a comedy back then was quite insane. So the fact is that the Columbia, the studio that would eventually take the risk and finance this movie, took a pretty massive risk. And of course, it obviously paid off, as this movie was insanely successful, one of the highest grossing movies of that year. And, the whole story of it is kind of a whole nother can of worms. But, like I said, it's a crazy story, and they apparently only had 13 months to make it. And despite all that, they made a fantastic film. So let's get into a lot of things why Ghostbusters is special, not just to me, but of course to a lot of other people. And the main thing is the cast. The cast is brilliant. Bill Murray steals the show. And I'm not saying that the other actors here, they all do great and they bounce off each other. I think one of the things that I noticed about this movie, rewatching it, is the fact that this film has some perfect comedic timing. Now, what I mean by comedic timing, like, basically actors are either saying their lines or they're maybe even improvising during a scene, and they just react things. They say a certain line with a certain mannerism, and it's just perfect. It's comedy gold, and I really can't explain it other than that, but this film has peak comedic timing. And like I said, this film that I've seen many times. I mean, I saw this film as a kid, I've seen this film as a teenager, and I'm seeing it now as an adult. But despite all of this, it still makes me crack up on a lot of scenes. Like, specifically a lot of scenes in the movie, they just make me almost burst out laughing sometimes. And it still cracks me up. And that's just a testament to how great the comedic timing is. And of course, the actors, the main cast. I mean, Bill Murray steals the show, man. He is so funny in this movie. His, dry pan sarcasm that is throughout the entire movie is hilarious. He's kind of like the character that Winston was supposed to be, where he basically cracks jokes, makes funny things. He's also a scientist, but he's also kind of the character in a lot of ways that breaks down all these crazy concepts to the audience, because you really need a character like this in this movie, because Dan Aykroyd's character, Ray, and Harold Ramis's character, Egon, are always spouting all this crazy dribble about Ghost and the plot. And Bill Murray's character, and Winston's as well, have to break it down. And I think it's very important to have characters like that, and it adds a lot of charm and makes the movie more relatable to watch. But Bill Murray is so funny. There's so many iconic scenes. My personal favorite is the scene where the Ghostbusters are talking with the mayor. And then, of course, you got the infamous character, Walter Peck, I think is, remember his name, the EPA guy. And him and Venkman have a beef. And what was it? Venkman says something like, "It's true, this man has no dick." And Beck just gets all mad and runs up. It's a hilarious scene. It gets me every time that I watch it. But yeah, the comedic timing, the comedic moments, and the jokes are, for the most part, absolutely hilarious in this movie. And not just Bill Murray, I think Dan Aykroyd has some funny parts. He's definitely like the heart of the team. There's some really funny parts of like how naivety excited he's about some of this stuff, and how the other characters look at him and react is, once again, like I said, comedic timing and how the actors bounce off each other just makes situations hilarious. And same thing with Egon. The guy is so smart, but he's not exactly the most well-versed in being, like, I guess we call it like a more charming person. He's very much a nerd. But there's so many moments with him, it's really funny. And he, like I said, he bounces off more normal characters, and you get the comedic parts of that. It's really hilarious. I also like Ernie Hudson. I do agree with some people. He definitely gets the short end of the stick. That's one of the little problems with the movie. Winston doesn't nearly get enough screen time. But I do like the moments where he's like the normal guy, and he basically completely, generalizes certain concepts for the audience and does it very well. So like I said, the cast is iconic. I can go into all the other supporting characters. You got Sigourney Weaver here, who is, playing a role separate from what she was doing at the time with Ripley. But I like her in this movie. She's really awesome. Also, the actor, what was his name? Rick Moranis, playing Louis Tully. He cracked me up actually a lot more than I originally suspected, because, man, he has some hilarious lines in this movie. He's like this very nerdy tax, accountant guy. And he's really funny in this movie. Like, it just, some of the things he says, it's like, you just have to stop for a second and you burst out laughing, because it's just like mainly with him, it's like out of pocket moments. So he's really funny. And I also like the plot. The plot's really well structured. I like how the movie flows for the most part. I like the fact that we get to see more and more Ghost throughout the movie. And I also like, too, there's a lot of what's been called like the Egon and Ray moments of the movie, where they're kind of spouting all this, dialogue and lore about the plot and the characters. And, I think to most normal audiences, they don't care. Like, for example, the building that the Ghostbusters fight Gozer in at the end was built by Ivo Shandor, and it's built, as part of this whole thing with Gozer worshippers. But I like that war stuff. It adds interesting context to the events of the movie, gives some nice background and world building, and things that maybe future things in the property would later expand on. So I think that's another element I noticed while rewatching. I like some of the new lore and the more technical scenes in the movie. It's pretty good. Another big thing is, of course, the ghost busting part about it. The special effects, I think, for the most part, hold up. I really like the ghost busting gear. I like how they're treated in the movie, like they're basically exterminators. I also like the fact, I just like the action scenes. The action scenes are really cool. I would say there's not that many in the movie, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And of course, I love so many other moments in the movie, like some of the ghosts. My personal favorite is always the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I just think it's so funny. Like this gigantic, friendly looking mascot is basically Gozer the God takes the form of that thing, and that thing is going to be bringing annihilation to the world. A friendly, cute marshmallow man. I mean, that's hilarious, bro. That's perfect comedic moments right there. And like I said, the special effects are done really well. I think for the most part, they really hold up. There's like maybe a few compositing things in the movie, and of course, everyone complains about the terror dogs, but like I said, I still think that for the most part they look good. And I mean, if you have a really good story, you have really good comedic moments, I'm willing to let visual effects slide, anyways. So it's not necessarily a deal breaker for me. And yeah, another big thing I really like about this movie I wanted to mention is the pacing. This movie is really well paced. It's like it flows very naturally. It's a little under 2 hours, this movie, but it really doesn't feel like that. Like for me, it felt like I was maybe watching an hour. It felt very fast, very fluid, and the pacing's really well done. I do think for the most part too, they explain the story pretty well in this movie. And, they also get into a little more technical details. And I also like some of the writing in this movie, especially with the whole thing with crossing the streams. I like how that was set up earlier in the story. And even the callbacks in the movie that I didn't even notice before, I notice now. Like, like at the end, like in the beginning of the movie, when the trio find their first ghost, the librarian ghost, Ray says, "Get her." And at the end of the movie, they fight Gozer, and and Venkman's like, "Ray, get her." Once again, small moments like that also add to the movie and are really great. And yeah, I think for the most part, there's just not too many complaints about this movie, I would say. But let's get into some of my little cons. And like I said, this is for the most part a pretty damn great and perfect movie. One of them is obviously the one that everyone mentions. Winston definitely gets the short end of the stick. Now, I actually heard there was a reason for this, was because the actor or the character Winston actually had a lot more to do with the story and was much more of the everyman type of character to explain the more crazy concepts to the audience, so to speak. And he was also going to have like a backstory and stuff, but he was dramatically cut down at the last minute because the studio wanted more Venkman. And on one hand, I think, Venkman is absolutely the star of this movie. He's great. But I really do think there could have been a balance found where maybe more focus could have been placed on Winston, and we could have learned more about him, and we could have just in general, had a more of a balance. And like I said, I've never read the script or Winston had a backstory and stuff, in which maybe I'll do a review of one day. But I think for the most part, yeah, Winston definitely gets the short end of the stick. And I know for future movies and shows, they would kind of fix that. But yeah, it's a little nitpick I have with this movie. I do think, too, some of the concepts, and like I said, this kind of ties into the Winston thing. Some concepts, in the movie aren't exactly explained thoroughly. And I feel like I said, if you have more of a character, Winston makes more of a presence in the movie, because Venkman's already a scientist with them. And even though he is kind of that character as well, I do think having more Winston would have also helped explain more of the zany and complex topics that this movie sometimes boggles itself down to. But other than that, I really don't have any other complaints about this movie. It's pretty pitch perfect. The movie has great comedic timing, great comedic scenes, has all these strange elements with Ghost. You also have Dan Aykroyd's crazy paranormal dialogue in this movie. You have some crazy concepts like a giant Stay Puft Marshmallow Man attacking New York, a green, slobbering, eating ghost, which I didn't find out till later was actually a homage to John Belushi, who was originally actually supposed to appear in this movie. But that being said, I think Ghostbusters in a lot of ways is kind of the lightning in the bottle. All these crazy elements about ghosts, these guys starting their own business, all these crazy elements really shouldn't work as well as they do in the final film, but they do. Everything kind of blends together. It's nicely paced. Some of the scenes and comedic timing and moments and dialogue are hilarious still. The chemistry, between the cast is so great and on point. And like I said, this is just one of the best comedies of all time. All the acclaim that Ghostbusters has gotten over the years is absolutely deserved. It's honestly one of the most rewatchable movies I've ever seen. Like I said before, I've seen this movie so many times. I can't even tell you how many times. But, each time I watch it, I really don't get sick of it, I think for the most part, it still cracks me up for the most part, today. There are still some scenes that just they just crack me up, and it works. And that's when you have a great film and a classic. And there's no, like I said, there's completely understand why this movie, is beloved as it is. But yeah, that's my kind of quick off the top thoughts on Ghostbusters from 1984. If you haven't seen Ghostbusters, I'm sure most people have, but if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend you definitely go see the movie. It's definitely worth your time. It's one of the greatest movies of all time, one of the funniest comedies I've personally ever seen, and also in general, just one of the strangest films dealing with concepts like paranormal stuff, ghost stuff, that, let's be honest here, I don't think Ghostbusters tackled it in a very unique way, especially compared to more generic films like The Conjuring, which, they deal with ghosts and all these other stuff and more religious stuff. I kind of like the fact that even though in this movie there is a slight religious undertone, and mainly the last part of the movie, I do like how this movie also embraces more of the wackier topics about ghosts and religion, but it doesn't go full on just generic demon possession like The Conjuring does. But that's a little bit of a side point. But yeah, this movie's great, holds up very well, highly recommend. That's my review of Ghostbusters from 1984. Just remember, guys, who are you gonna call? All right, y'all have a good day, and peace all.